Obinna, stand up.
Pastor?
Do you recognize these transactions?
No.
Your name is on every one of them.
I never authorized those payments.
Then explain this.
I can't.
Obinna Kalu had spent the morning preparing the church before anyone noticed him. He checked the generator, replaced 2 bulbs, fixed a loose door hinge, and cleared rainwater from the children's classroom. By the time worship began, he quietly took his usual seat near the back. Pastor Elias was preaching about faithfulness when Beatrice Iroha entered carrying a brown folder. She whispered into the pastor's ear. His voice stopped. He opened the folder. Then he looked toward Obinna. "Brother Obinna, please stand." Obinna slowly rose. "Yes, Pastor." Pastor Elias held up a document. "Do you recognize these transactions?" Obinna stared at the page. His name appeared beside several payments. Then he saw the total, and 4.8 million. His stomach tightened. "No, Pastor." Beatrice looked at him. "Are you certain?" Obinna looked toward Miriam. She was already frightened. "Yes," he said. "Yes, I am certain." The church fell silent. The meeting happened immediately after service. Obinna sat across from Pastor Elias, Beatrice, and Caleb Ofori. The financial folder lay open between them. These transactions were made through accounts connected to the church, Beatrice explained. Obinna looked at the pages. "I never authorized them." Caleb leaned forward. "But your name appears on the documents." "I know. And your signature." Obinna stared at the signature. It looked like his. Almost. Pastor Elias folded his hands. "Obinna, is there anything you have not told us?" Obinna hesitated. That hesitation was enough. Beatrice noticed. "You know something." Obinna looked down. "I have helped people financially." "Who?" "I can't say." Caleb leaned back. "Why not?" "Because they trusted me." Pastor Elias looked troubled. "If church money is involved, privacy cannot come before accountability." Obinna nodded. "I understand." But he still refused to name anyone. Outside the office, whispers had already begun. By evening, the church had a new story. The quiet caretaker had stolen millions. On Monday morning, Obinna returned to the church. He stopped at the gate. Caleb approached with a sealed envelope. "Pastor asked me to give you this." Obinna opened it. Suspension. Effective immediately. You cannot enter the administrative block or access church equipment until the investigation is complete. Obinna folded the letter. "How long?" "We don't know." He nodded. Caleb lowered his voice. "I'm sorry." Obinna studied him. "Do you believe I stole the money?" Caleb paused. "I believe the truth will come out." It was a careful answer. Too careful. Obinna walked away. At home, Kene ran toward him. "Daddy, why are you back?" Obinna forced a smile. "I finished early." Adayeze watched him from the doorway. She knew that wasn't true. Miriam waited until the children left. "Tell me what's happening." Obinna sat down. "I've been accused of stealing church money." Miriam's face changed. "How much?" 4.8 million. She stared at him. "Obinna!" "I didn't take it. I believe you." But her voice carried something he had never heard from her before. Fear. By Wednesday, the accusation had escaped the church. Someone posted a photograph of Obinna standing outside a bank. The caption said, "Where did the money go?" Miriam saw it first. She knew the date. Obinna had gone to the bank that afternoon. He had returned home carrying receipts. She had never asked what they were for. Now the photograph looked suspicious. At church, members discussed it openly. He was seen at the bank. Maybe that's where he moved the money. Nobody mentioned that Obinna had worked there for years without ever showing signs of sudden wealth. Nobody asked what the photograph actually proved. It proved only that he had entered a bank. That evening, Miriam confronted him. "What did you do at the bank?" Obinna answered quietly. "I withdrew money." "For what?" He hesitated. "To help someone." "Who?" Obinna looked away. Miriam closed her eyes. "You're still hiding things." "I promised." "To whom?" Obinna said nothing, and that silence frightened her more than the photograph. Salome Eze sold rice and stew from a small roadside stall. She had 2 children and very little money. For 3 years, an anonymous donor had helped with school fees, medicine, and food. She had never asked questions. She simply thanked God. That week, another payment arrived. But something was different. The message read, "Do not mention the person who helps you." Salome stared at it. She had never been told that before. Later, 2 church women approached her. "Salome, did Obinna ever give you money?" She froze. "Why?" "We're investigating church finances." Salome's heart raced. She remembered Obinna repairing the church roof. She remembered him quietly asking about her children. She remembered the anonymous payments. "No," she said. The lie escaped before she could stop it. The women left. Salome sat down behind her stall. She felt ashamed. That night, she prayed, "Lord, if my silence is hurting an innocent man, show me what to do." Across town, Obinna received another message. "You should have kept your generosity private." Beatrice remained in the church office long after everyone left. She recalculated the missing amount at 4.8 million. Then she checked the original bank statements. One transaction appeared twice. She frowned. She checked again. The same bath 400,000 had been included in 2 separate entries. Her stomach tightened. She had prepared the summary herself. Pastor Elias entered. "Still here?" "I found an error." He walked over. Beatrice pointed at the figures. The original report was wrong. "How wrong?" 400,000 naira. Pastor Elias stared at the page. "So the missing amount isn't 4.8 million. "No." "How much?" 4.4 million. He exhaled slowly. Beatrice looked ashamed. "I should have checked everything." Pastor Elias nodded. "We correct it." Neither noticed Caleb standing outside. He had heard the entire conversation. He walked away quietly. Then he took out his phone. He typed one sentence. They found the duplicate. Miriam was cleaning the bedroom when an envelope fell behind a drawer. Inside were receipts, school fees, medicine, food, medical tests. She counted them. There were dozens. None belonged to their household. One name appeared repeatedly. Salome Eze. Obinna entered. He stopped when he saw the receipts. Miriam looked at him. "How long?" Obinna sat down. "Almost 3 years. You paid all of this?" "Not all." "Why didn't you tell me?" She didn't want anyone knowing. Miriam looked at the receipts again. "How much have we given away?" Obinna was silent. "That much? We had enough." Miriam shook her head. "Sometimes we didn't." Obinna looked down. "I thought God would provide." "He did." She looked at him. "Through you." Obinna smiled faintly. Miriam's eyes filled. "I understand why you wanted to keep it private." Then her voice hardened. "But I don't understand why you thought your wife should be the last person to know." Obinna had no answer. The receipts had revealed his kindness. They had also revealed his mistake. Bartholomew Namani had served the church longer than most people remembered. He trusted scripture. He trusted careful accounting, but he did not trust assumptions. He began searching old welfare records. Several anonymous payments appeared over the years. Some had been made by the church. Others had been personal donations. Then he found Obinna's name. Small amounts. Regularly, quietly. Nothing extravagant. Nothing suspicious. Bartholomew called Beatrice. Did Obinna have access to the church welfare account? No. Are you sure? Yes. Then why is his name appearing beside these families? He personally helped some of them. Bartholomew leaned back. The accusation made less sense. A man secretly spending his own money to help struggling families did not automatically become innocent. But it created a question. Why would someone who already gave his own money steal from the church? Bartholomew closed the ledger. Something is missing. Beatrice asked, "What?" The story. Bartholomew compared the suspicious transactions with Obinna's movements. One payment had supposedly been authorized by Obinna on a Tuesday afternoon, but church records showed that Obinna had been suspended from financial access that morning. He could not have authorized it. Beatrice checked the timestamp. The transaction had been processed at 4:12 p.m. That's impossible. Pastor Elias looked at the document. Could someone have used his credentials? Beatrice nodded. Yes. Who had access? She hesitated. Administrative staff. Caleb was included, but so were others. Pastor Elias asked, "Can we prove who used the account?" Not yet. Bartholomew pointed at the document. Then we don't accuse anyone. Obinna was called into the office. He heard the news silently. For the first time, something inside him shifted. Maybe the investigation would clear him. Then his phone vibrated. A message appeared. "You are getting too close." Obinna looked around the room. Everyone seemed normal. That was the frightening part. Adaize found her father outside that evening. "Dad." Obinna looked up. "Yes. Someone is threatening you." He froze. "How do you know?" "I saw the messages." Miriam came outside. "What messages?" Adaize looked at her. "Someone told Dad to stop asking questions." Miriam turned toward Obinna. "No more secrets." Obinna looked away. "I don't know who it is." "Then Pastor Elias needs to know." Obinna nodded. The next morning, he showed the pastor the messages. Pastor Elias looked disturbed. "This changes everything." Bartholomew agreed. "Someone is afraid of the investigation." Beatrice opened the financial records. "We should trace every access." Pastor Elias nodded. "From now on, nobody works alone." Caleb entered the office. "What happened?" Pastor Elias looked at him. "We received threats." Caleb's face tightened. "Against whom?" "Obinna." For a brief moment, Caleb said nothing. Then he smiled. "That's terrible." Obinna watched him carefully. Something about that smile stayed with him. The investigation uncovered another account. The missing money had not gone directly to Salome. It had passed through the church welfare account, then into a private administrative account. Beatrice recognized the account number. "Caleb has access to this." Pastor Elias looked at her. "Does Obinna?" "No." Bartholomew leaned forward. "Who authorized the transfer?" Beatrice checked. "The credentials belong to the administration." Caleb entered the room. "What are you checking?" Beatrice looked up. "Welfare transfers." Caleb remained calm. "Anything wrong?" "Some transactions need clarification." "Then clarify them." Bartholomew handed him a document. Caleb studied it. "I didn't make this transfer. Your credentials were used. Someone else could have accessed them." Bartholomew nodded. "That's possible." Caleb smiled. "Then we're looking for someone else." He walked out. Bartholomew watched him leave. Beatrice whispered, "You don't believe him." "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to." Bartholomew looked at the account. Evidence first. But suspicion had entered the room. That evening, Caleb visited Obinna. "I heard they're investigating another account." Obinna nodded. "They found money moved through the welfare account." Caleb sighed. "That could help you." "Could it?" "Of course." Obinna looked at him. "You seem very interested in my case." "I care about the church." "You also told me to stop asking questions." Caleb's expression changed. "I was trying to help you." "How?" By telling you not to destroy your family over something you cannot control. Obinna stood. You're afraid. Caleb laughed. Afraid of what? The truth. Caleb's smile disappeared. He stepped closer. Brother Obinna, sometimes people who think they're fighting for truth don't understand what they are starting. Obinna said nothing. Caleb walked away. Seconds later, Obinna's phone vibrated. He knows. Obinna looked toward the road. Caleb was already gone. For the first time, Obinna seriously considered that the man threatening him might be someone he had trusted. The following day, Pastor Elias, Beatrice, Bartholomew, and Obinna met to examine the second account. A document showing the transfer history lay on the table. Bartholomew pointed to a private account. We need to identify the recipient. Before Beatrice could respond, the lights went out. The office went dark. Someone cursed outside. Beatrice reached for her phone. The emergency light came on. Bartholomew immediately looked at the table. The document was gone. Everyone froze. Pastor Elias locked the door. Who took it? Nobody answered. Beatrice checked the security system. One camera had stopped recording. What time? Bartholomew asked. 4:17. He looked at the clock. The blackout had lasted 11 minutes. Exactly 11. Pastor Elias looked toward Caleb's office. Who controls the security system? Beatrice answered. Caleb. Nobody spoke. Then the office door opened. Caleb stood outside. I heard there was a problem. Bartholomew looked at him. Yes. Caleb smiled. What happened? Bartholomew answered quietly. Evidence disappeared. Caleb's smile faded. Bartholomew checked the security system. The camera had not simply failed, it had been manually disabled. Beatrice looked at the settings. Someone used administrator access. Who has it? Caleb. Caleb denied it. I didn't touch the system. Can anyone else access it? Not without my password. Silence. Pastor Elias looked at him. You're saying someone knows your password? Caleb nodded. Possibly. Bartholomew asked. Who? Caleb shrugged. I don't know. The elder stared at him. Then change it. Caleb left. Beatrice waited until the door closed. You think he did it? Bartholomew answered carefully. I think the evidence is pointing somewhere. Pastor Elias looked troubled. Don't accuse him without proof. Bartholomew nodded. That is exactly what happened to Obinna. The room went quiet. Nobody wanted to repeat that mistake. Outside, Caleb entered his office. He locked the door. Then he opened a drawer. Inside was the missing document. Caleb stared at the document. It showed a transfer from the welfare account. Obinna's name appeared on the authorization. Caleb smiled faintly. He had not created the signature. He had copied it from an older document. Years earlier, Obinna had signed a legitimate welfare authorization while helping a struggling family. Caleb had found the document. Now he had a weapon. He placed the altered page among the financial records. Later, Bartholomew found it. Obinna, he said. Obinna looked at the page. His face changed. I didn't sign this. Beatrice studied the signature. It looks like yours. I know. Pastor Elias asked. Could you have forgotten? Obinna shook his head. No. Miriam was called in. She saw the document. Her confidence weakened. Obinna looked at her. Miriam, she didn't answer immediately. The room felt different. This wasn't another rumor. This was his signature. And for the first time, even the people who loved Obinna had to confront a terrifying question. What if there was something he genuinely could not explain? Obinna returned home devastated. Miriam followed. I know you didn't steal the money. He looked at her. But, she hesitated. I don't know what that signature means. Obinna sat down. I don't remember signing it. Maybe you did. No. How can you be sure? Because I know what I signed. Miriam sat beside him. Then find it. Obinna looked at her. What? Find the original. He suddenly remembered an old welfare authorization. 3 years earlier, he had signed paperwork to help a family through the church's welfare program. The signature had been almost identical. He searched through old receipts. Nothing. Then Adaize entered. "Dad, what are you looking for?" "Old church documents." She thought for a moment. "You kept some in the blue box." Obinna opened it. Inside was the original welfare form. He placed it beside the suspicious document. The signatures looked almost identical, but there was one difference. The original had been signed with blue ink. The suspicious document had been printed. Someone had copied his signature. Obinna looked at Miriam. "I told you." She nodded. But the question remained. Who had access to the original? Beatrice compared the two documents. She enlarged the signature. The suspicious one was copied. Pastor Elias looked relieved. Then, Obinna is cleared. Not yet. Beatrice pointed to the authorization date. This original document was stored in the church archive. Bartholomew frowned. Who had access? Beatrice checked the archive log. 3 people. Pastor Elias, Beatrice, Caleb. Pastor Elias looked at Beatrice. "Did you copy it?" "No." "Did you give it to Caleb?" "No." Bartholomew looked toward Caleb's office. Caleb was not there. They searched the archive. The original document was missing. Someone had removed it after the investigation began. Pastor Elias closed his eyes. "This is deliberate." Bartholomew nodded. "Now we know." Beatrice asked, "Know what?" "The person behind this isn't simply hiding stolen money." He looked at the empty archive shelf. "They are building a case against Obinna." Obinna sat alone in his car outside the church. He didn't go inside. For weeks he had prayed. He had tried to remain calm. He had protected Salome. He had trusted God. But now his name had been forged. His family had been frightened. His reputation had been destroyed. He finally bowed his head. "Lord, I don't understand." His voice cracked. "I know you see the truth." He wiped his eyes. "But I'm tired." There was no dramatic answer. No sudden miracle. Only silence. Obinna remained there. After several minutes, he whispered, "Help me not to become bitter." That was all. He drove home. Miriam was waiting. She sat beside him. "You don't have to pretend you're strong." Obinna nodded. "I know." She held his hand. "You can be hurt and still have faith." Obinna looked at her. For the first time, he understood that faith wasn't pretending pain didn't exist. It was refusing to let pain decide who you became. The independent auditor arrived the following morning. He examined the suspicious signature. Then the original welfare records. He confirmed the signature had been copied. But another discovery complicated everything. A Raks and 1.2 million withdrawal had been authorized using Obinna's credentials. Pastor Elias stared at the document. When was this? The auditor gave him the date. Obinna was silent. Miriam looked at him. "You were there that day." "Yes." "What were you doing?" "Helping with welfare payments." The room went quiet. "So you did authorize something?" Obinna nodded. Yes, the distinction mattered. He had authorized a legitimate welfare withdrawal, but someone had taken that real authorization and altered the amount. The auditor explained the difference. The original amount was 120,000. The altered document showed 1.2 million, a single extra zero. Obinna stared at the page. Someone had taken a genuine signature and a genuine transaction and turned them into false evidence. Now the mystery was no longer whether Obinna had signed something. He had. The question was, who changed what he signed? The archive access log became crucial. The original welfare authorization had disappeared 3 days before the accusation. Only 3 people had access. Pastor Elias, Beatrice, Caleb. Pastor Elias had been preaching during the relevant period. Beatrice had been attending a financial conference. Caleb had been in the administrative block. Bartholomew asked him about it. "I don't remember accessing the archive. You were there. I work there. Were you in the archive?" Caleb became irritated. "I don't remember." Bartholomew watched him. "You remember every transaction when you're defending yourself." Caleb stood. "Are you accusing me?" "No." "Then stop treating me like a criminal." Bartholomew calmly replied, "That's what everyone did to Obinna before we had proof." Caleb left. Outside, he entered his car. His hands trembled. He opened the glove compartment. Inside was a key, the archive key. Beatrice traced the Oben 4.4 million. The money had moved in pieces, small enough to avoid immediate attention, large enough to accumulate. The final destination was an account connected to Caleb's private business. Pastor Elias stared at the statement. "How long?" "Almost 8 months." Bartholomew shook his head. "So he was taking small amounts before the larger theft." Beatrice nodded. Then something changed. "What?" She pointed to the dates. The withdrawals increased sharply after Obinna's anonymous welfare payments became more frequent. Caleb had noticed the pattern. He realized Obinna's transactions could create enough confusion to hide his own. Pastor Elias closed his eyes. He used generosity as camouflage. Bartholomew nodded, and then built the accusation around it. Obinna sat quietly. He looked at the statement. "I never knew." "You weren't supposed to," Beatrice said. That sentence stayed with him. Someone had studied his kindness, then turned it against him. Caleb finally told Pastor Elias part of the truth. His business had failed months earlier. He borrowed money. Then he borrowed more. He began taking small amounts from church funds, intending to replace them. But every attempt to recover the money failed. His debt grew. He stopped thinking about right and wrong. He thought only about tomorrow. Then he discovered Obinna's welfare payments. At first, he considered using them to explain one discrepancy, then another. Eventually, he realized he could make Obinna look responsible for everything. Pastor Elias asked, "Why didn't you come to me?" Caleb laughed bitterly. "Because I was ashamed." "And now?" Caleb looked down. "Now I'm terrified." Pastor Elias shook his head. "Shame should drive us toward truth." Caleb answered, "Mine drove me toward another lie." That was the tragedy. He had not fallen in one moment. He had chosen the wrong door repeatedly, until he could no longer remember where the first lie ended and the next one began. The auditor discovered a pattern. Every altered document had been created from a legitimate original. Someone wasn't inventing transactions. They were modifying real ones. That explained why the evidence looked convincing. Obinna's signature was real. His welfare payments were real. His bank visits were real. Only the interpretation was false. Then Beatrice found one final clue. A printer log. Every altered document had been printed from the same administrative computer. Caleb's workstation. Pastor Elias called him. "Come to the office." Caleb arrived. The printer log was on the table. He looked at it, then at Pastor Elias. "I can explain." Bartholomew shook his head. That's what people say when they still believe explanations can save them. Caleb sat down. His shoulders dropped. He looked at Obinna. "I never wanted this to happen." Obinna stared at him. "You built it." Caleb nodded. "I know." The room went silent. Then Caleb said something nobody expected. "I took the money." Caleb confessed. He had taken the money gradually. When the church began investigating, he manipulated legitimate documents. He used Obinna's welfare records because they provided believable transactions. He created the false O4.8 million picture. He encouraged rumors. He even leaked the bank photograph. Pastor Elias looked devastated.
You threatened him!
Caleb nodded. "I wanted him to stop." You forged his signature. Yes. You let the church destroy his reputation. Caleb lowered his head. Yes. Obinna finally spoke. Why me? Caleb looked at him. Because people trusted you. Obinna frowned. That doesn't make sense. It does. Caleb swallowed. You were quiet. You kept secrets. You helped people anonymously. Nobody knew how much money you moved or why. He looked away. I knew they'd believe the worst. Obinna's eyes filled. The truth hurt. Not because Caleb had chosen him randomly, but because he had studied his goodness and discovered how to weaponize it. The independent audit was completed. The original back 4.8 million accusation was officially corrected. The actual amount stolen was 4.4 million. Obinna had not taken it. His welfare payments were legitimate. His signature had been copied. His bank visits had been misrepresented. His silence had made him vulnerable, but it had never made him guilty. Pastor Elias gathered the leadership team. We will tell the church everything. Beatrice nodded. No hidden details. Bartholomew agreed. Truth cannot be partial when injustice was public. Obinna sat quietly. Pastor Elias looked at him. Are you ready? Obinna took a breath. No. The pastor understood. But I'll be there. That was enough. On Sunday morning, the congregation gathered. Nobody knew exactly what they were about to hear. Pastor Elias stepped onto the platform. The church became silent. Pastor Elias looked across the congregation. Today, I owe someone an apology. Nobody moved. He explained the financial error, the forged documents, the copied signature, the independent audit. Then he said, Obinna Kalu did not steal the church's money. A woman covered her mouth. Someone began crying. Pastor Elias continued. The actual theft was committed by Caleb Ofori. Caleb was not present. The church listened in silence. Pastor Elias admitted that leadership had trusted incomplete evidence. Beatrice publicly acknowledged her accounting mistake. Bartholomew explained why the investigation had been reopened. Then Pastor Elias turned toward Obinna. Brother Obinna, we failed you. Obinna looked down. The room was silent. The same people who had whispered about him were now looking at him. One man stood. I accused you. Another member began crying. Obinna didn't speak. He wasn't ready. Some wounds close slowly, and public vindication does not erase private pain overnight. After the service, people approached Obinna. Some apologized. Some cried. Some simply stood there because they didn't know what to say. One man said, Please forgive me. Obinna nodded. I forgive you. The man smiled. Then Obinna added, But I hope you learn from this. The smile disappeared. What do you mean? Next time, ask questions before believing rumors. The man lowered his head. I will. Miriam watched from nearby. She had expected Obinna to feel victorious. He didn't. Later, Pastor Elias found him alone. I should have defended you. Obinna looked at him. Yes. The pastor took a breath. I was afraid of scandal. I know. I thought protecting the church meant protecting its reputation. Obinna looked toward the sanctuary. The church isn't its reputation. Pastor Elias nodded. No, it's the people. The pastor's eyes filled. I failed you. Obinna answered quietly. Yes, there was no need to soften it. Forgiveness did not require pretending the wound had never happened. Beatrice approached Obinna outside the church. She looked nervous. I need to say something. Obinna smiled slightly. You already apologized. This is different. She took a breath. I was so determined to find wrongdoing that I became careless with the truth. Obinna listened. I corrected the records incorrectly. Yes. And that helped create the accusation. Yes. Beatrice lowered her head. I am ashamed. Obinna looked at her. You were trying to protect the church. I was. But accountability without wisdom can become injustice. She nodded. I know that now. Obinna smiled. Then don't waste the lesson. Beatrice looked up.
What do you mean?
Use what happened to build something better. She nodded. We will. For the first time, the church began discussing something more important than who was guilty. They began discussing how to make sure the same thing never happened again. Salome came to Obinna after church. She could barely look at him. You knew, Obinna said. She nodded. When they asked me, I lied. I understand. I was afraid. I know. She began crying. My children needed help. Obinna nodded. I never wanted you to feel ashamed. But because you protected my privacy, they accused you. Obinna was quiet. Yes. Salome wiped her eyes. I don't know how to repay you. You don't. She looked confused. The help was never alone. Salome cried harder. Obinna continued. Don't let gratitude become another burden. She nodded. I prayed for the person helping us. Obinna smiled. And? I asked God to bless them. He laughed softly. He did. Salome looked at him. How? Obinna looked toward the church. He gave me the opportunity to give. She finally smiled. The secret that had caused so much pain had also revealed something beautiful. Generosity mattered, but so did truth. That night, Miriam found Obinna outside. You're thinking? Yes. About what? Everything. She sat beside him. I doubted you. Obinna nodded. I know. I hated myself for it. You shouldn't. She looked at him. You understand? Yes. You're not angry. I was. She smiled sadly. At least you're honest now. Obinna laughed. Then his expression became serious. I also failed you. How? I thought secrecy made every good deed better. Miriam waited. But you were my wife. He took her hand. You deserve to know what was happening in our home. She nodded. So what changes? Everything. They sat quietly. No dramatic promise. No perfect ending. Just two people choosing honesty again. Inside, Caney called for them. Miriam stood. Come. Obinna followed. The house sounded ordinary again. And after everything they had endured, ordinary felt like a blessing. The church leadership discussed Caleb's future. Some wanted to expose every detail publicly. Others wanted to quietly recover the money and move on. Bartholomew refused both extremes. The theft must be handled properly. Pastor Elias agreed. The authorities will deal with the criminal matter. Obinna listened. Someone asked him privately, do you want Caleb punished? Obinna thought carefully. I want justice. And forgiveness. Yes. The person looked confused. How can you want both? Obinna answered. Forgiveness does not erase consequences. He had learned that distinction painfully. Caleb had hurt people. The money had to be accounted for. The truth had to be documented. And the church had to accept responsibility for its own failures. Obinna did not need revenge. He simply refused to carry hatred into the rest of his life. That evening, he prayed for Caleb. Not because Caleb deserved what had happened to him. Not because the theft didn't matter, but because Obinna didn't want another man's sin to determine the condition of his own heart. 3 months later, Obinna returned to work. The church looked exactly the same. The same doors. The same chairs. The same generator. The same leaking tap that had somehow started leaking again. Obinna laughed when he saw it. Of course, he fixed it. New financial procedures were now in place. No single person controlled the accounts. Every transfer required independent verification. Records were reviewed regularly. Beatrice worked alongside another accountant. Bartholomew reviewed financial reports. Pastor Elias welcomed questions. The church had learned that trust did not mean refusing accountability. Obinna returned to his ordinary work. One morning, a young member approached him. Sir? Yes? Thank you. For what? For everything. Obinna smiled. I'm only fixing things. The young man shook his head. Sometimes fixing things is important. he walked away. Obinna watched him. For years, he had believed humility meant becoming invisible. Now he understood. He could serve quietly without believing his existence had to disappear. One Sunday morning, Obinna arrived before everyone else. He unlocked the main door. Sunlight entered the empty sanctuary. He stood there for a moment. Months earlier, he had been accused in that same building. Now he was opening the doors again. Pastor Elias arrived. "Good morning." "Morning, Pastor." The pastor looked around. "You're here early." "I always am." They smiled. Pastor Elias paused. "Thank you for coming back." Obinna nodded. "This is my church too." The words were simple, but they carried weight. He walked toward the generator room. The pastor remained at the entrance. For years, Obinna had served the church without expecting recognition. Now he understood that belonging was not the same thing as being praised. He belonged because he was part of the body, and the body had wounded him. But it had also learned. Pastor Elias watched Obinna disappear down the hallway. Then he quietly prayed, "Lord, teach us to love people before we protect our image." The church doors remained open. The sanctuary filled. Miriam sat with the children. Obinna entered last. He walked toward his usual seat, near the back. Kene looked at him. "Daddy, you're sitting here again." Obinna smiled. Apparently, Adaeze laughed. Pastor Elias stepped onto the platform. Before beginning, he looked toward Obinna. There was no awkwardness anymore, only understanding. Obinna looked around the church. He remembered the folder, the accusations, the whispers, the photograph, the threats, the forged signature, the nights he had cried alone. He also remembered God's silence, and how that silence had not meant abandonment. His faith had not been proven by avoiding pain. It had been tested inside it. Miriam reached for his hand. He squeezed hers. Pastor Elias opened his Bible. "Let us pray." Obinna closed his eyes. This time, he wasn't praying for God to prove him right. He was simply grateful that bitterness had not won. After the service, a new member approached Obinna. He was a young man who had recently joined the church. "Excuse me." Obinna turned. "Yes? Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why do you always sit at the back?" Obinna smiled. For a moment, he remembered the first Sunday, the brown folder, his name, Miriam. Obinna turned. The silence. He looked at Miriam. Then Adaeze. Then Kene. Finally, he looked toward the pulpit. "Because I learned something." The young man waited. Obinna smiled. God doesn't need a front seat to see a faithful heart. The young man nodded. Obinna stood. He walked toward the church doors. Outside, people were greeting one another. Children were laughing. Someone was arguing about football. Life had continued. Obinna looked back once. The church was imperfect. So was he. But grace had not required perfection. Only truth. Only repentance. Only faithfulness. He stepped into the sunlight, and behind him, the church doors remained open. The end.